The whole point of this is for us to kind of discuss incident response. What kind of made me bring this up as a topic was we're going through a process now where we're training some of our employees on incident response. What I've realized is that just because you work in cybersecurity or you work in IT, that you don't necessarily have an incident response skill set. So unless you are an incident responder or someone that handles those things on a half regular basis, you probably just don't have that experience. For instance, in my career, yes, do I have incident response experience? Some. Have I talked about it? Do I understand the theory behind it? Sure. But have I done that as a formal job, right? No. And so could I walk you through the minutia of it? No. And generally speaking, when someone does a presentation on it, what I hear is they talk a lot about the tools you use or the things you look for and things like that. But I rarely ever hear someone ask questions about what I'll call the administrative side of it, right? So what software is the team using to communicate? Where are they capturing information? How are they communicating an incident? Is that via in-band communication, something like Microsoft Teams maybe that your company has, or is that through out-of-band text message? What are they doing? So what are those things? What about roles and responsibilities? Do they establish things like incident commander, incident lead, or is it just kind of a free-for-all? So I threw up here just some questions that I randomly had and tried to kind of organize them at least a little bit. Tim, the first two are linked to the two slides that I put together. Again, I pulled most of this information out of ChatGPT just for the sake of having it on the screen so we can talk about it. But again, the idea of this is to have a discussion about it, kind of see if there is someone in the room who has incident response experience, if they do that as a job or a role, and kind of share that information to kind of better everyone. So, Tim, I don't know if you want to add anything or take anything away from that.
No, as I mentioned, the IR stuff, so I can speak to some of that stuff, especially from like an outside perspective. But yeah, no, I think they're good questions, especially because I feel like Adam and I worked on I worked on my first security team with Adam, and it was definitely kind of like almost a little bit YOLO, and it was kind of like just jumping in and doing a bunch of different stuff. And like now I think it is like people are trying to, and this is good of Corey and any other organization, right, is to kind of think about how they're going to do this stuff when it actually occurs, because it will occur at some level. It could be minor or it could be massive. And having a lot of that stuff already figured out in place is a good thing. I think a lot of it is kind of practice, unfortunately, like practicing that something bad's happened. How do you actually respond to it? How do people communicate? What I've seen working in an organization is getting people into different roles so that they understand what like you said, and establishing those roles too. And it could be different based on each organization. If it's just three of you, right, everybody's kind of everybody's involved, unfortunately. And also using people's strengths too, right, using what they're pretty good at. Again, in practice you can shift them into different roles just so they can kind of see the other sides of stuff and makes them better. But I think a lot of your stuff too is just like identifying what actually that is. I will say I've worked some IR cases where we had like an out of band. So we just set up email, but we set up people's like personal email instead of using work email. Now that was based on whether or not we thought the email system was compromised. So that it could kind of depend on the incident.
In my immediate, so in that, just to discuss that specific scenario, right? My immediate thought is legal would rip their hair out if they heard that you were using people's personal emails. Because I mean, how are you keeping track of the records? That seems like it would create how do you keep track of all the documentation? It wasn't secure, you know.
And did you accidentally make your personal email accounts discoverable?
Right.
And see, I would go the opposite way. I would, based on what we've talked about in the news, how, companies are always slow to disclose or never disclose. I feel like lawyers would be like, don't put any of this on company equipment, keep it out of band, because the less we know, the better. And if you use the word incident, God forbid, then we have to do, it just,
There's a couple different things there in my experience. Is one, the lawyers often aren't involved right away. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But I've also seen them, they've never really dictated that within an organization. Now, again, to your point, you do have to be careful within company, because I've seen one of our people get in trouble for sending like a screenshot. So that's where you also just defer to your legal team. So that would be one of the people you want to get involved as far as like practicing and setting up is like, we need to identify the person we're pulling into this incident and establishing some of those baselines of what we can and can't put in.
So let's dive into that topic then. So talking about out-of-date communication. 'cause
Hey,
that-
Corey,
Good.
just 1 second.
Yeah.
I would also say at this point, when you're trying to discuss, where you might be storing information, what you might be doing with it, you've got to keep in mind what your, what kind of data or what kind of breach is this? What kind of data, what kind of regulations do you have to fit? So if you're doing PCI is going to control a lot of what you do and how you control the flow of communication and the documents that you might have to keep. If you're doing healthcare and you have HIPAA, it's a completely different set, perhaps, than what you have going on. So you do have to be very careful to make sure that you're not making a decision on incident response that actually is another breach within your regulations that you have to.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess, and that was kind of my thought whenever, we talked about, mentioned personal email, like that seems like that could be potentially creating another breach. You go through the conversation about, well, those are employees, they're sanctioned, yada, yada, so on and so forth. So I guess, again, let's to dive into the topic, what in an ideal scenario, since we have a chance to talk about this before, right? We're not in the middle of an incident. What are the qualities or things that you would look for in an out-of-band communication solution? And then if anybody knows about any of those solutions offhand, what are they? So what are the qualities that you look for in an out-of-band communication solution for something like IR?
So my experience has been email, or we set up a Teams via. So especially if you bring like a third party IR company, they can set up their own Teams channel for everybody to communicate in.
So let's assume you don't have a third party IR team. Let's assume that you're building it out internally.
That's where, again, I would honestly just go to your legal team and go, hey, can we use our internal teams, or do we need to go set up a separate Slack channel or Discord or something?
Slack, all of this is predicated on the idea that you're not flying by the seat of your pants and talking to your legal team while you're also looking at your logs going, hey, somebody's accessing our data.
Right.
Which I do not recommend being in that particular scenario. But yeah, that's ultimately going to come down to what your lawyers say you can get away with. And I would strongly advocate for a Slack instance that only security responders are going to get on and use, and have the capability of pulling in other subject matter experts, because you may end up needing to pull in your sysadmins, your
Third-party incident response team.
your third-party incident response team, your developers that may have access to databases that your security guys are not going to have the access to, nor the knowledge to go and interface with in the way they're going to need to. You're going to have to pull those people in. So that's going to be the driving factor, is whether or not it's acceptable to your legal team and has the capability to facilitate the communications you're going to need. And you're going to want open channels while dealing with responding to the incident. And I've been in instances where it's handled with emails and chat bracketed back and forth. And I've also been involved where everybody gets on a call and is actively talking through it in real time, and somebody's in there barking out orders. Hey, go look at these logs. Hey, go dig this up.
And that's what I've seen whenever we've been practicing as of late is we have unofficially, we have an incident response manager and incident response, forget the exact title, he's incident response. So we unofficially have roles. I don't think they're named in our IRP, but we have roles where those folks are, one of them kind of becomes what I would call the incident commander, and one of them becomes the manager, for lack of a better term. So the manager is collecting the bits and bobs, the IOCs, the so-and-so blocked this on at this point in time, what have you. And Tim pulled up the incident response, some of these roles that I'm going to talk about, or some of the roles that we can discuss. But And then the commander is acting as that almost liaison between executive leadership and giving them the updates that they need. Because I have been in incident response scenarios, or even just non-cyber incidents, production down, right? Websites down, where you have an executive leader that walks in and sits on somebody's shoulders and just disrupts the entire process, right? I think one of the worst things that can happen is you get a CISO or a CIO, some C-level person that walks into this room or gets this whatever telephone, whatever meeting's going on, walks in and asks a question, and then because that person has a C-level title, all of a sudden 75% of the team switches from this very good path they were on, trying to actually mitigate this incident, trying to stop this threat actor or whatever was happening. And because C-level asked a question, they all of a sudden change focus, and off we go down this road. And 45 minutes later, we come back because they eventually ask, have we stopped the threat yet? It's like, well, get that person out of the room. Don't let them come in. Let the commander be their interface for that, or whatever that title or role would be. Let them provide updates and have that person say, look, you're in a box. We're going to tell you what you need to know every 15 minutes. Do not come back to me before 15 minutes is up. Matter of fact, I will tell you in 15 minutes what your update is.
I will tell you in 15 minutes is up.
Right. If you have something you want to ask me, and if I think it's pertinent, I will relate it to the team. Now, getting a C-level to understand that and actually respect that.
That's what I was gonna say.
I mean, that's all they're thinking.
That's a hell of a lot easier to do when they're not sweating bullets.
I need a space where I can speak ideally.
When they're thinking about the 3 letters in their desk, it's not the time to have that conversation about, I need you to leave the room. I'm not leaving the room.
So I guess and you actually, Adam, you mentioned developers, and that's actually not something that I've thought about in that out of band. So we were talking about the out of bands, mentioned something like Slack. I guess to somewhat circle back around to that, for out of band communication, you're going to want to have some kind of space where you can easily add or remove members to it as needed. Because like you're saying, this is not something I thought of. If your cybersecurity team is most likely not going to be wholly knowledgeable, or at least not anywhere that I've worked, on an application that's developed internally. There's going to be a dev team that supports that. They're going to have that expertise. You're going to have to pull them in on an incident, just as you would, or as we do for IT, if it's or for databases or whatever, right? You're going to pull in the SME for that subject area. And so you're in that out-of-band communication solution, you're going to want somewhere where you can quickly and easily add people and share information. Along those same lines with roles and responsibilities, you're going to want to have space in or defined in your IRP or procedure or whatever that there's going to be those SMEs, those specialized SMEs or whatever you want to call them, where you pull those people in. So I would say that's not something that's necessarily on this list. I guess it's not really external partners. But I mean, case in point, external partners as well, adding them to a Slack, right? Like you'll want to have, maybe law enforcement is involved. Maybe you want to add them so that they can see what's going on.
And while you're talking about adding and removing people, the other thing to consider in your communications rollout, whatever platform you choose, is the possibility of the threat being on your security team. So you want to be able to compartmentalize the information that's there so that if you start to suspect, hey, what is one of the guys in the room doing this, you can leak that information in ways that you can ferret that out.
That's an oof. I hate that you even say that. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying it's an oof.
So I read a news story in December. I don't remember if I talked about it while we were around the table in December, but there was a guy working for a security company out of Atlanta that went and hacked a hospital and then was using that incident to drive business for hospitals in the area. Like he did the attack and then posted it on Twitter anonymously, and then his security company was referencing that attack on Twitter to say, look, you need us to help you with your security. This is what happens to, right. The one of the arsonists was a firefighter. Like I don't think that there is a large population out there doing that, but I'm certain that there are some folks that are working in the security industry that are also moonlighting as threat actors. So
Well, the healthcare space has that, right? A lot of that is like 50% of security incidents come from internal to the organization. And a lot of that's just looking at records that they shouldn't be looking at.
Right.
So that's that. And again, Corey, like the communication too, is a lot of the main reason for the communication is more for a technical resource to work out some of the technical stuff. A lot of your communication posts and afterwards are going to happen in like meetings and other stuff. So that's more just like coordinating, hey, we're going to have this meeting at this time so we can talk about the technical details and over voice. You know, obviously too, we have funny enough, we have an autopilot in here recording everything we're saying, which is fine in this scenario, but I've kicked out autopilot before out of a room because I'm like, we do not want any documentation about what we're saying here in this conversation, especially if legal's not involved yet, because legal's going to dictate a lot of that stuff. And that's what I told them was like, we need to kick this thing out of the room until legal has weighed in and said it's okay. And that's where I like, to me, I just defer a lot of times to the legal team going, I will do whatever you want. If you want me to knock it off on different stuff. And I also, again, you just have to be conscious about what you're putting in as far as can be discoverable stuff. And there is like, lawyers have this like kung fu, and also I would say the law's changing constantly. So they're always like, like they lean on the side of caution with a lot of that stuff and don't want you to put anything in there. Other times they don't, like they're fine with it. And really that also can just be different from person to law person.
While you're wayfinding on, if you're in the position of wayfinding your incident response program at a company, the initial conversations with your legal team may inspire some deer in headlights moments. It's good to have a few in your back pocket for what a security incident might look like. You also need to have a conversation about so you need, while you're talking about roles, you need to find out what's acceptable to C-levels, what's acceptable to your legal team. You're going to talk about data collection, like what kinds of data you can collect, where you can store it, how long you can hang on to it. And they need to understand that in the course of responding to the incident, you're going to have to write stuff down. Like the first rule of incident response is you create a timeline, you create a series of events, and you be able to like show evidence that you know what happened. They need to understand that. And then you need to have a conversation about words, because words matter. And some organizations are very phobic about the I word and the B word. You don't say incident, you don't say breach. Because if you say those words, then now we have to notify our customers and that becomes a problem. So you need to know that up front so you're not in the middle of your response having your people use the wrong words.
It's also helpful too, like as part of the attack chain, knowing where you are and what has actually happened, as opposed to like, oh my God, we got breached, when all you had was somebody scanned your firewall on your perimeter.
Sure, yeah. Or
so
like, and there's a vast difference between somebody compromised an email account and somebody's got code execution on our servers and is exploiting our data.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I've had certain terms that I had to put in for vulnerability management. This isn't even an incident. It's like vulnerability management. I had to put in like some sort of term around this is privileged information, because they were concerned that me talking about vulnerabilities with like a server team, if we get owned by that same vulnerability, then we are held liable for knowing about that vulnerability and it not being fixed. And so what I actually did, because sometimes I would forget, I was just like, I just put it in my signature. So my signature always had, this is like privileged information or something. Again, that's why talking to the legal team, because they're going to have, some of them are going to have different paranoia and others are going to be like, no, we can deal with this in certain ways. And again, I think Jeff made a really good point about the industry you're in, because being PCI or healthcare with HIPAA or high trust or some other organization, SEC has all these different new rules that they're starting to refine now. That's really going to dictate and kind of establish a lot of what you're talking about around communication channels and even just what people can and can't say.
So I want to circle us back around to the communication solution, if you will, inbound or out of band, right? So in theory, you would, I don't know, I guess you could spin up your out of band every time. You may want it to always be out of band, but let's just say it's inbound or out of band, doesn't really matter. How and what should you be capturing in the course of an incident? So I think, for instance, like IOCs is going to be an obvious one, right? You're going to want to capture the usernames, IP addresses, so on and so forth. But how are you capturing that information? And this goes, we mentioned kind of like the Otter thing that Tim mentioned. So like, for instance, Teams can do closed captions, right? It can do a transcription. Would you want to spin up a Teams meeting and have it transcribe everything? Is that a good idea? And teach your people to say something like, please note, and then thing, or please note, I blocked IOC IP at this time, right? So you have notes to go back to later, or is that a bad idea given the conversation we just had about legal?
I mean, that may be useful, but I'm just thinking back to the time that I sat down and tried to read the entire communication log from Apollo 17, and it's just lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff that I don't care about. And then occasionally something interesting happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, is like being in an incident where things are just, especially in the moment, having dictating to people how they should be documenting stuff, I think just kind of gets in the way, because a lot of them are kind of doing that. And then you can piece a lot of that stuff together as like a post incident. You do like an after action report, or do, depending on what you're actually putting together, but you can have like that meeting to talk about some of that stuff afterwards.
But yeah, and that was my thought. So let's say you're incident manager for like whatever role, insert role here, right? The person who's responsible for capturing those IOCs, they're going to be in that meeting or in that room with those people. They're going to be listening to the conversation. Somebody's going to say, I blocked IP address. They're going to say, okay, I got that. You blocked IP address. Is that correct? And so they'll have that information. But going back and looking at that transcription log, again, if everyone could get on board with saying something like make a note or IOC found, or, if you could have a keyword, in theory, you could go back and control F in that transcription and find that information and when it happened.
In theory, provided.
I think your incident managers, I think your incident manager's a note taker, or you have someone dedicated to note taking that captures all of that stuff. And it just depends on your organization at that point.
Yeah. Find an intern or an entry level person that can't, be on hands on keyboard, but they at least take notes. And they
no, I don't know. I don't know that you want an intern or somebody new that doesn't understand what's flying around.
You put one of your most senior people on. I think it makes a lot of sense to have somebody that's very senior doing nothing but playing air traffic control and building a history, like keeping track of all the information that we know and disseminating that information to people that can go and dig for more information. If you know an IP address is malicious, somebody needs to be going hunting down all of the accounts that IP address might have touched.
Right.
Because then that tells you if that account was touched, where else was it touched from? That gives you another set of IPs that you need to go and run down. And that sort of zigzag is how you go and find the full scope of the incident. And you can't take all the notes you need to take and coordinate and share the information with management and go and dig all that. Like it's too much for one person to do. You have to be able to coordinate and send that information out.
Yeah. That's
the team.
That's what leads me to think, or at least in the organization size that I have, that it would be nice to have in an incident, what I would call an incident commander, which is the person that's responsible for oversight of the incident and communication with your C-levels. An incident manager, which is the person that is handling the coordination of resources. Hey, maybe the engineer or analyst says, hey, I found an IP address that we know is malicious. The manager would say, okay, go look at every, it's going to be a senior person, right?
Yeah.
Been in IR, done IR. Go look for every account that's touched that IP address or vice versa. And then you're going to have something like an incident lead, which is still going to be a senior person, maybe not in IR specifically, but is going to be handling maybe note taking or something like that, that knows what to capture. Because I think, to Tim's point, knowing what to capture is almost as important as capturing it, if that makes sense. Because again, like we just said, you can look at a transcription log of the conversation, but if you didn't capture it live, you may or may not know later, was that important or was it not?
Does anyone have suggestions on, because I mean, I've never seen anything that I was absolutely floored, blown away with in terms of capturing all of the data you would have in an incident, right? So like, and it's about being able to capture different types of data, have it correctly categorized and available to your entire team. The way I've always seen this done is just a shared document somewhere that folks are entering data and editing. Somebody's got the pen, or you're using like a shared OneNote or something where folks can all just dump data in.
Deactivated my trap card. That's exactly what I was saying next.
Yeah. So does anybody have suggestions on a whiz bang tool that makes that really easy? Or is this the thing I need to go and the piece of software I need to go and write so I can ride off into the sunset?
Jeff, did you? I think Jeff unmuted.
I did unmute. It's not to Adam's point, but it was a question that I had for you, Corey, and that was, how many people do you have on your incident response team? Because you've just taken half, if not 3/4 of my team and dedicated them to admin work.
Yeah, and our numbers aren't too far off from that. So we have 2 dedicated incident response team members, and that's what I mean is their title is incident response. Now, the way that it works in an incident, when a cybersecurity incident gets activated, is my team, essentially everybody, well, and one up from me, Brian, my supervisor, we all get activated and become part of that team. And so we all become resources. I step back from my usual role as director, and I have a manager that's under me. They step down from their role, essentially. We all meld into one team, one IR team, and the large majority of us become the hands on keyboard folks, right? Whatever we're good at. I managed Palos before, so a lot of times I'll go in and start looking directly at Palos. We have a team that we have 2 or 3 people that work in the SIM, so they go and they look in the SIM. And so, to your point, we have 2 people that are those IR folks. Those 2 people have become, in the practice we've been doing, become either that lead manager, coordinator, like our commander, like I've been talking about, and the rest of us kind of become those hands on keyboards. Usually, my manager or I kind of become that resource coordinator. And so I guess the short version to answer your question is we have 2 people dedicated to IR, but in a true incident response scenario, we've got a total of 12, I think it's 12 or 14 people that are technically part of that incident response.
Cool. Yeah, and we kind of do a lot the same way. Usually it ends up being me that becomes that kind of manager of information, but also dictating the rest of the team and assigning them to tasks. And that's actually how we functioned when we had our Kaseya incident a few years ago. And we did use a big shared document that I basically was the editor for, and I would go in. People could drop stuff in there, but I would go in and edit that, make sure that it flowed the right way or move it around. And we did keep a timeline. So I think that's a big key is, every step along the way, kind of documenting, when it happened, when you had things going on, so that you can go back later and paint and tell that story like Adam had mentioned. You need to be able to tell that what's going on.
So sorry, David, go.
I was gonna say, I agree. Like the timeline's important, and I think something the question is, does everything have to be on a timeline, like a Teams or a Slack chat, where it automatically is throwing timestamps on everything, like we did for Jeopardy, like we knew exactly when somebody threw in a cast a vote, or do you need 2 separate? Like you've got just raw data like IPs and IOCs, and then you've got actual timeline of when did I see this IP in the firewall.
We have like a yearly incident response event. And so for that, we do use a shared document, but we have 5. And we have,
hate that that's the cutting edge.
well, yeah, somebody sitting in the room listening, taking notes. We have 2 lead people for each shift. I mean, this is all a practice, so it was a little bit more easy. And then we have 1 overarching person.
Pause the hackers. I'm going to get some pizza.
But so we have a IOC spreadsheet, like we have all fleshed out. It's beautiful
Nice.
with timestamps. Then we also have another spreadsheet for just like general, like, oh, I observed this. And then, but you do have to write down what time you put everything in. But
Okay.
then at the end of the day, like the person taking the notes, which we're lucky to have like a very large cyber team, multiple teams. So it's like somebody from our sister cyber risk team. So they kind of know what's going on. So they know what to track down, but they'll go through all of our spreadsheets and then make a timeline of the day.
Yeah.
But it's nice because it's somebody not in the weeds, but then
Yeah.
we can all like validate that they did that or that we did that. So
So this kind of goes back to the my position on your policy versus the procedures that you actually follow day to day.
yeah, I don't
The-
know what policies.
The policy stuff that you're going to have a document that is for C-level, for management, legal consumption that explains the incident. And then you're going to have another document that has all the other bullshit that you don't want to tell them, but you need to know.
Yeah.
That you're going to reference later if they need additional detail in the document for their consumption.
Because they
But,
will
yeah.
latch on to something and they will want to know
You're
exactly
absolutely right.
when that thing was done. Yes.
When you say, and we know they did X, Y, and Z, and they didn't touch F, then the lawyer's going to come, how do you know? And
Yeah.
you got to go and demonstrate how you know that there isn't a tea kettle orbiting the sun somewhere.
So I guess, and Adam, I think the unfortunate answer is because we've had 3 or 4 people say that shared document, create a Google Doc, right? That's your out of band for your documentation.
Oh,
right?
we sometimes use Security Onion has like a built-in in Kibana, like a
Yep.
I can't remember what it's called.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it logs the time and you can put like action statements.
Okay.
Yeah,
What?
it used to be the Hive that they used, but now they've gone with something else. And I was actually just looking to try and see what that product was.
Yeah, I
Okay.
can't remember what it's called.
Yeah.
But it's pretty easy to use.
I remember hearing
cannot-
about the Hive, but that's
It's part of Kibana though.
yeah, it's not, the Hive is not a SOAR, but I guess,
So it fell out of favor because they didn't close source it, but they started going more down that SOAR model, doing the automation and less
Okay.
about the documentation. And so there were some changes within that organization that forced Security Onion to be like, yeah, we aren't going to be involved in this because this is entirely more than what we're looking for. But along those lines, I mean, even ServiceNow has their security incident response package,
Yeah.
which last time I saw it was not very good, but
I may or may not be responsible. I may or may not be, I said responsible, familiar with that solution. So yeah, and I would say, I guess that's where I was at in my head with like the Hive or like a SOAR platform. A SOAR, I don't think would be a great, so that might be what initiates the incident, or you initially identify rather the incident via whatever, because it's going to be a ticketing process or whatever kind of style process. But that wouldn't be where you ultimately end up documenting it, unless there is a SOAR platform that does facilitate that. But like you're saying, a SOAR ends up being so focused on that automation piece, kind of that quick action, that it doesn't, I don't think necessarily lends itself well to actually documenting the incident itself, the timeline, the IOCs, that sort of thing.
The SOAR we use, again, we're assuming, or this theoretical organization has a SOAR, but it does have a war room, a virtual war room.
Okay.
So it's built similar to like a Slack channel full of bots. So it feeds in all the automation stuff
Oh, that's
into that
cool.
war room, but it also, people can just write directly into it. They can run, mainly run commands that, of course, run automations, but they can just directly feed data into it from there, and it keeps the entire timeline together.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's why I put the thing forward, was because one of the guys that I was gonna try to have on, he did give me a large document. We can share the slides. I'm gonna probably put something together on my website, exploresec.com. But to David's point, it's exactly right. It's an automation platform. So an AV alert fires, go to the SOAR. The playbooks then run there and executes your forensics collection, and then it checks outbound IPs for anything bad, and then captures an image for that machine and dumps it into the SIEM or DB, and that's all before like an analyst even gets to the alert, right? So it's meant more for capturing kind of helping you respond and get some of that level 1, tier 1 type of stuff done before you even go to the incident.
I just developed a terrible use case for AI in my head for this war room we're talking about, right? So
Literally all of them are terrible use cases
yeah.
for AI.
So something Microsoft Copilot or Security Copilot or whatever they started out calling it, right? One of their use cases when initially 6 months ago or whatever was like, yo, just let Copilot dive through your sim and tell you what's wrong, right? So reverse conversation where I was talking about transcription and we were talking about whatever this otter thing sitting in here, transcribing. So like, what if you had an AI that just sat in your chat with you and somebody could say, can somebody go check and see if any users have had an interaction with IP address blah? And the AI goes, cool, I'm handling that. It just runs off, into your sim and hey, this is the bad stuff we found. Anyway, there's your AI security product that you need to develop.
Be out of the job.
Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean for that to derail anything, but yes, interesting. So,
Did Jeff ever find while I was out of there, did you find the name of that product?
So they kind of developed it themselves, and it's called Cases, and they have integrated it. Like I'm not sure who was commenting before, but they've integrated it into their Kibana interface and everything.
I'll have to play with that.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
So I guess question to the group, we've been talking about this magical place where we want to capture this information. What information should you capture in an incident? Now, I think you've already talked about some, right? So IOCs, obviously, IP addresses, URLs, usernames, email addresses, yada, yada. A timeline is obviously important. We've mentioned that a couple of times. I would assume actions taken. So anytime an IP address was found or blocked or deemed, I guess you're going to find an IOC. You're going to determine, oh, that is actually related. And then you'll want to know when it was blocked. The last one probably the most important thing. What other information should be captured in that report? A narrative, but I think that comes kind of after. Is there other information that you should capture?
As a groundwork, pre-work kind of thing, blind spots. And if you come across any blind spots you didn't know about prior to the incident, you need to record that and add it to your
Lessons
list.
learned.
Yeah, like if you know that you don't have any logs on a given application, or
Your WAF will tell you the IP address, when it connected, and how long it was connected, but won't actually tell you any of the requests that were sent.
right, if you're blind to that sort of traffic, like you have to be able to note that, and
Yeah.
that's part of the risk you accept is
That's if your WAF logging is turned on, by the way.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Blind spot one is WAF doesn't send us logs, right?
Right. Sorry, I said to be in trouble there.
the WAF has been in passive mode since it was in.
Well, that's actually useful. If you have it in passive mode, you should be collecting logs. That's the whole point.
I can neither confirm nor deny the amount of times that we get into a scenario, and my sim guys come to me and they go, yeah, we don't get logs for that. I'm like, what do you mean we don't get logs for that? Like, well, yeah, we don't get logs for that. Or we get logs, but they're not of the detail needed, or they don't have the information. Or, oh, we get logs, but they're
What
not
do you mean
parsed.
security appliances installed? We wrapped it.
Yeah.
What did you do after you wrapped it?
I know some of them are probably gonna listen to this later, so I guess for full disclosure, this is a problem that they've inherited, not one that they've created. So,
Yeah.
for what that's worth.
So to that point, I do want to take a moment to talk about logging and what you have in place, and also checking to see what rolls off in X amount of time, right? Especially if you don't have stuff going to a SIM, because I've worked plenty of cases where they send us all the logs from like 2 days ago and the incident happened on the third day, or they rolled off before they actually pulled everything down and sent it to us, right? So that is a huge, and again, and I thought about that because like in my experience, what it went in an executive summary was there was a couple different things. And again, your legal team's going to ask a lot of these questions, like what data was touched? Do we have evidence of it being data exfilled, right? Things that, again, impact us as far as compliance and regulatory stuff, because you need to lose at least 500 people's information before it triggers something as far as HIPAA goes, as far as like notifications and other stuff. You can apparently you can lose anything $4.99 and below, and you don't have to deal with it as much. But there are certain things that they're going to want asked, and you also have to identify. I think this goes back to what you guys were talking about with what's captured for leadership. What are they going to want to know about? The questions they're going to ask you, and maybe having those conversations ahead of time, but your legal is really going to define of where was the initial point of access, because that goes back to lessons learned, but it also helps establish, do we have something we need to close, because we do not want that to happen again. And then what did they actually do with that in our environment, and do we have the logs around that? Because and that goes back to even Office 365 logs, and that I think partly goes to your question, Corey, about do we need to have inbound or out of bound? A lot of attackers, threat actors, they go in, deploy ransomware. They're not necessarily in email watching communications. Some more different, persistent and advanced threat actors might be doing that, but not a lot of them are. They're just in there for a purpose and they want to get out. And I will also say a lot of emails gotten a lot better if MFA is in place, because it makes it a lot harder to get in there.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a sexy movie thing, right? Like the threat actors in here, they're tapping into our phone, they're listening to our call. I think I'm with you.
They don't care.
Yeah, if they were listening to emails, if they were watching emails, they did that before. They got access, they didn't get caught, so they sat passive. They learned everything that they needed to know.
Yep.
And when you see data leaving, that's the smash and grab, man. They've either been there for so long that they know where it is and how to get it out.
They're living off the land.
Yeah, or they're doing a run by, right? They just smash and grab. So I don't know that. I think that's a sexy movie thing, like, they're in the firewall with me. Like,
Right.
That's not how it works. Like,
And that's right.
Every type on this keyboard.
you're not actively creating Palo Alto firewall rules to block the threat actor in your environment, right? And so, submit, wait for it to replicate across the Palos, right? Like, it's not how that works. I mean, you could, but he's fighting me back.
Grant Hale, he's always on the other side.
What were you about to say?
Or just things that we do notate, like one time during our practice, whatever you would call it, red versus blue exercise.
Yeah.
We found our EDR tool wasn't working in the way that we anticipated. Like it was something with NTP still reaching out, and we were able, our attacker, Grant Hale, for those who know, I know Enrique knows, it's on online, was able to get Cobalt Strike through our system because something with our EDR tool allowed NTP for some weird reason, and then we went to the vendor and got that turned off. Which was it's their standard thing. So you're welcome, everybody. If we all use the same one, I won't say what it is.
What's our time check, by the way? I know we're
CrowdStrike.
Nope.
We got about 15 minutes, 20 minutes.
15 minutes. Oh, that's enough time to finish the conversation completely. So I guess to answer the question, we talked about some things that you should capture. As far as where to capture them, sounds like open up Microsoft Word and just start dumping stuff in. I mean, I hate to say that, but that sounds to be the thing. If you need to collaborate, get on a Slack or a Teams or something like that, and use some combination of
We use
talking
this
about
weird
it.
thing that has chat built in, but I can't remember.
WebEx.
The name. No, I wish. No, but it's got documents, slides, and a chat built in.
I'll throw an honorable mention to the offline version of Microsoft Word, which is pen and paper.
We use
Thank you,
whiteboard.
David. I've been waiting to say that for a while.
There you go.
Well, why didn't you?
I've been waiting. We've had some great conversation.
If you're worried about ransomware, maybe
Talk about it,
now
man.
your system,
Yeah.
if they're still in your environment and still encrypting things, you might lose access to that document that you just wrote down all the thing.
We probably won't get a chance to touch on what you should practice for in an incident response scenario, because that's something that I think is pertinent to this conversation. But to tie together what you're saying with what Adam mentioned earlier is maybe in an incident response scenario, you should practice having a malicious insider on your security team. And maybe one of those ways that you practice that is, or one of those kind of flags for that is throw some honey IPs or honey information out there in your team's chat and see if the threat actor picks or the malicious insider picks up on it. Maybe you have stuff documented on pen and paper. I don't know, just thoughts for that part of the conversation we're going to lead through.
So what you're saying is create a honeypot and a honey token and drop them into your conversations.
You need a
See
honey
if
token
anybody hits them
in
later.
your direct
I-
response.
Right.
I
Yeah,
think it depends on what part of the incident you're in. If ransomware's already been deployed, those guys are already gone. You can use whatever communication you want.
If you've got a malicious insider, you really need to have a third party. Like if that's a thing.
Oh, no,
you
I think you
suspect
shut
is
it down
going
at that
on,
point. Yeah, yeah.
like you need
I
to
guess
talk to like you in a leadership position within security need to go and have a conversation with your C levels and your lawyers, and y'all need to pay some people. You go to and you got to have.
You should already know that. Yeah, I think it's rare. It depends
Sure.
on your industry too. Like healthcare, yes, it's 50%, but every other industry, it's not really that big of a thing.
Yeah,
Unless to Adam's point, it's a disgruntled employee. If your
I think
organization,
we're only talking about scenarios where it's a somebody on your security team is the bad guy that you're chasing. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's so rare though.
what's that?
I think it's just so rare that's actually a thing.
Sure, yeah. I'm just saying like that you need to start smashing fire alarms and
Well, I mean, I will say too, it depends on your going back to your industry too, right? Like the Tesla engineer that got bribed for like $1 million by the Russian, by a Russian national, like that is a threat model for you. So yeah, that's where you do your threat modeling and figure out what's actually a scenario that would occur.
We use Nextcloud in our events, which is like, it is a
next cloud.
online, or it's a cloud hub, like, and you have chat and little documents and stuff. I mean, it works really well because off-prem.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, but I mean,
It's tailored for IR, or is it just?
I don't know
Just
if
that,
it's
right?
officially in our IR plan, but we use it in our yearly events, and I kind of like it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do some homework on this.
Well, I mean, I think going back to the conversation is you want somewhere where everybody can quickly, you want a collaborative area where people who are finding things in the moment can quickly put them and document them to then be ingested by the documenter, the manager, whatever, in whatever report they're kind of live creating in the course of the scenario, and then have a way to be able to go back and look at all that information, because you are going to have to create an AAR. You are going to have to explain that stuff to leadership. You are going to have that conversation with your direct boss, and that boss is going to go talk to other bosses. And so all those questions are going to come up, and they're going to want to know more than just in general, what did you do? Because when you say, well, I blocked an IP address, they're going to say, when did you do that? And what they think they want to know is the hour, minute, and second and nanosecond that it happened. I don't think they actually care, but they feel like they have to know that information.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have to recount that information to them to get them the level you're fighting their level of comfort, right? What do you document to give your executive leadership level of comfort?
So Corey, I think though, you do want to know when you block that IP, right? Because
Yes, yeah,
if,
yeah.
if you are looking through logs and you know at 4 p.m. you blocked an IP address, and then you find that there's another IP address that's now accessing that data after 4 p.m. In a similar manner, there's probably a good chance that they just pivoted off that block. And
Yeah.
Yeah,
The attackers moved to a new address.
I'm being a little bit salty as far as the executive leadership thing, meaning that like they act like they care down to the second when it was blocked, but they really just want to know around about when. But yeah, to your point, Jeff, absolutely. You're the team, and I guess to that point, going back to it, documenting in that collaborative area when an IP address was blocked should be something that you capture, because yes, that team is definitely going to want to know that information. Yeah.
yeah, you can always generalize. You can never get more specific once
Right.
it's done.
Right, exactly. Yes, there you go. That's what I was saying. Yeah. Tim, do you want to take us back to the first kind of set of question slides? I think we've only got a couple minutes left. So,
Well, actually, if we only have a couple minutes left, I do want to, because I got this, and I thought this was really good, is fun tools for IR. So this was all stuff that was given to me from someone that works in IR on a regular basis at a top 500 energy company. One of the bigger things too for Corey too, he called this out specifically, is getting into a community like a DFIR community to ask some of these questions that you're asking, right? And there's of course, everyone's moved away from Slack and everybody's in Discord now. So there's a Discord channel for digital forensics specifically. But yeah, this is just some different tools too. If you're looking for like tools that might be useful, and I believe a lot of these are open source or freely available.
I think things we didn't touch on would be IR scenarios to practice. We talked a little bit about that. What does that look like for a team, right? Practicing those roles. So that was another thing that I was going to want to talk about was to kind of throwing those roles out there and then discussing like how you practice those roles. Because I think it's, practice like you play is a good thing. Like, like you're saying, Alicia, with the way y'all do the annual. Yes, that's an ideal scenario, but in theory, if you do that enough, right, and hopefully we're personally trying to do it more than once a year. We're on a quarterly schedule right now, which I think is pretty good. And we've got some trainings that lead up to that. We are working with a third-party vendor for that, but they've got some trainings that lead up to a live fire exercise. So we're doing that once a quarter. And so I think that's good. Annual, I think, is tough because you don't, those procedures don't stay fresh in your head unless you're doing it often enough. Annually, everybody goes, and then you spend the first 2 hours.
Last year?
Yeah. What are we supposed to do? What were our last
I'm
time?
like cataloging.
So
I know like the energy sector has GridX where it's more a paper practice of your roles.
yeah.
But it's not doing it like if you're
Common challenges. We didn't get a chance to talk about that. How can they be mitigated? But that goes into some of what we're talking about is in those, and ideally those sore spots, those lessons learned come up in those like, oh, we had issues getting the proper documentation created, right? I think if you're when you're also talking about IR, it has to be a holistic conversation. You can't just think about the front end of it, which again, that was kind of my whole spiel at the beginning was you talk about IR and the first thing everybody talks about is, oh, look at these sexy, cool tools that you can use. It's like, well, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, let's have the whole thing in the back end, including it up to how are you communicating? How are you documenting that information?
And then how long do you need to retain data and evidence? Like, do you need to be exporting logs out of your SIM?
Right? Are you keeping that on SharePoint? Are you printing it off, putting it in a file folder? How are you doing that? Solutions for IR teams using for collecting documentation, that sort of thing. So, we covered most of kind of the things I could think of off the cuff at least.
Anybody have any questions, closing thoughts?
Consensus from the room real quick. What do y'all think about kind of this discussion style instead of presentation?
I liked it. What's this board? I speak quietly,
we'll
so
work
I'll
on
forgive Tim. He doesn't even know he's doing it.
We'll work on a speaking conch that we can pass around the room.
Cool. Almost not streaming, so.
Cool. Well, thank y'all for coming to the first cul-de-sac meeting of the year. We may be in this room next month, or we may